Good afternoon, folks. We're ready to start off the 1 o'clock. To begin this session, we're going to start with assessing reasonable access with Pat Hawley. He works with the DOT quite often, so we know him very well. We rely on him. I am the supervisor for the technical services area up in Green Bay for DOT, and we rely on Pat when he helps us either get into or get out of some court cases and to negotiate for complex real estate. So we really appreciate his service to us. Pat's going to talk about the loss of access. Impacted access can be a major issue when you're negotiating property and to your budget. Good example is we can go into a property that may be a business, and if we take away their access and we didn't predict that we're going to spend an extra $100,000 or $200,000 for that access point, so we really rely on Pat when it comes to that. So that's very important to bring him in to our impacts. Pat also Pat's also involved in public coordination and litigation for the DOT. Presents brief overviews of the WSDOT changes on access, discusses how and the impacts will impact the parcels that we're touching. Pat has 25 years of transportation experience. He's a PE engineer. He's also a professional traffic operations engineer, and he works for raSmith. His area of expertise is traffic planning, access management, site circulation, internal and external, traffic impact studies, roundabouts, and parking studies. He has conducted dozens of reasonable access studies for WSDOT and the Department of Justice. Pat regularly provides expert witness testimony for access, traffic operations, and safety. And again, we rely on Pat a lot.
This audience, I'm going to kind of breeze through the first part in terms of the access management benefits. Everyone that's here is typically a little bit more aware of that. I kept it in there for those of you who like to take the presentations back and share it with other people or just to look around. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the property owner's access rights. Then we'll get into discussing reasonable access, what it is, how we evaluate it, and then looking at some specific case studies that we've looked at in the past for reasonable access. Kind of jumping through what is access management, gone through that in terms of placement and location of driveways, median openings, turn lanes, signals, and interchanges. We'll detail the overall benefits, safety, mobility, economics, and the aesthetics. So what is property owners' access rights when you're looking at a site? They've got the right to access the public roadway network. Well, it doesn't include access to all roadways or the most direct access. So in this particular example, we're kind of going through the property, arterial, and the collector on the side. Let's provide reasonable access. In this particular case, it might not be to either of the adjacent most logical streets or apparent street to the property owner. It might be to backage road, a frontage road, or some other type of facility that's different from what the property owner wants to have. So what is reasonable access? My definition might be different from yours. It's definitely going to be different than the property owners, as Hans is going to talk about kind of Quick Trip's view on access and how they look at it. In Wisconsin, the courts have kind of ruled it's really a function of the specifics of each case. It's not a cut and dry thing to say, yes, this is reasonable, no, this is not reasonable. In the past, as we've conducted studies and looked at reasonable access, there's a whole litany of different things that come into play that are often evaluated. More and more, what it comes down to is the internal circulation. And how are you impacting the internal circulation on that specific site? That's been probably the most dominant factor out of all these. The other ones will come into play, but the bottom line is almost always internal circulation. The other ones that can come into the equation are business and driveway visibility, bless you, travel distance and travel time, traffic safety without the access change, traffic operation without the access change. Essentially kind of building the cases to why is this change in access needed. If you're in the middle of a rural area, there's no crash history, operations isn't bad, and you're telling the property owner that the access needs to be off on a back road, it's a little bit harder when it gets in front of a judge and jury to convey that this is needed as opposed to if there's safety and operational issues. Site suitability is a large thing that comes into play when we're looking at sites. Lots of times we'll come into, particularly I'd say more in the urban area, where a project is going through and impacting a site. And it's, use a gas station for an example, it's an older style gas station in an urban location, which kind of the typical at a corner with 2 driveways on each side. And it's not the current model that you'd see, if Hans is building a new Quick Trip, he's most likely not going to build it based on that standard. So the change in access, the change, you're losing right away and a little bit of in circulation, is magnifying what is already a site that might not be best suited for its existing land use. Comparison with competing businesses. And when you're dealing with something that couldn't go in front of the jury, you're impacting a site that's competing with someone else and they've got different access, not necessarily right or wrong, that oftentimes comes into play. And how that a competing business, think if it's on the same project, is being treated by the public entity. Are you being consistent with how you're applying those access management changes? Comparison with a subject site prior to the impacts. And it kind of goes along with site suitability. How was there circulation and access before these changes occurred? Again, the project might be impacting, it's altering it, but very few older existing sites had good circulation or good access in the before condition. It was kind of a make do, and everyone kind of knows how to maneuver around the site and get around there. But it's definitely not how you would design it to today's conditions. So you need to kind of evaluate that. And then are there alternate solutions, both from the transportation side, but also from the site side, that can help you achieve reasonable access for the site? So we look at Wisconsin statutes. The deprivation or restriction of access is compensable. Loss of direct access is non-compensable if reasonable access is provided. And that's a key element there in differentiating that. Because if you can provide the reasonable access, it's non-compensable. The element that comes into play, and I'd like to bring up, is the impact of police power. And sometimes it comes into play directly with the access changes, but oftentimes it's independent, but they get blended together when you're impacting a property owner. That's where I like to kind of discuss them hand in hand as to what the role of police power is and how it impacts the project and also specific sites. So the police power is the power of government to act in the public good to promote public safety without incurring liability with resulting impact for private individuals. Power of government to adversely affect property interests without compensation. So basically, as a public entity, what can you do for the general good overall? Using a similar example, you've got the primary street down here, side street off to the side, and under the existing condition, the parcel has full access to the arterial roadway. Part of police power, you can construct a median down the arterial, and that gets converted to a right-in, right-out driveway. That applies to the construction of a median or closure of an existing median opening. We've got a secondary access off of the side street. For whatever reason, the side street is cul-de-sac closed, rerouted, realigned. Similarly done as a function of police power. It's not considered a taking if the property owner can still apply for an access permit, therefore no compensation. So in both these conditions, still have access to the adjacent street and the ability to apply for a permit at those locations. And those alterations were done as a function of police power. And I bring that up in the discussion of reasonable access because oftentimes they get blended together as to, is something being done as part of police power, construction of a median, at the same time as the roadway is being widened and you're acquiring land from that property, which is impacting their access in another way. So from a business owner's perspective, they're losing land, their access is being changed, and the median is impacting their access. All that are very blended together, but it's different as to how you evaluate it. Walk through a couple different reasonable access examples that we've looked at in the past. So the first one is Highway 100 Mayfair Road. It's located in Wauwatosa, which is a suburb of Milwaukee, maybe 20 miles outside of downtown Milwaukee. A couple things to note here. Subject property is right in this location. We've got I-41 right along the side. This is Highway 100 or Mayfair Road. We've got kind of an interchange with North Avenue is up here. A single exit ramp off of I-41 is located at that location. Highlighted there. So the area that we're looking at is in the circled area. And again, the property specifically is right there. I'll confuse you even more because we kind of tilted it. So now north is to the left. Here is that I-41 exit ramp coming off. Here is Highway 100. Two separate parcels. Building, parking lot here. Separate building, parking lot here. With an alley off of the back side. This driveway is obviously physically in the gore itself. This one is just outside of the ramp, but still within the influence area. High speed, high volume ramp location. There was a documented crash problem right in that vicinity with cars pulling in and out. This building has underground parking that accesses off of the back alleyway. Part of the project went through closure of both driveways, said all access occurs off of that backage road or alleyway, depending on how you classify it or define it. This department was sued, went through the administrative court, ruled in favor of DOT, and at the appeal level as well. This site is along the I-94 corridor, south of Milwaukee, kind of between Milwaukee and Chicago. It's part of the reconstruction of the I-94 corridor. This is, I-94 is just off the screen here. It's Highway 20. This is a frontage road. This is the subject site, a gas station. These are the passenger car tanks, fueling stations. These were for trucks, so it was a truck stop, but particularly along this corridor is a small scale truck stop. Typically weren't going to find the large semis. Occasionally you would. You'd have some of the smaller semis that would come through. It was really geared more towards some of the box trucks, dump trucks and things like that, just because of both the size of the site itself and the facilities that they provide. size travel station that you'd see, in fact, just to the south down in this location. In the before condition, they had a median opening and a full access location onto the frontage road, and a secondary access off of the stub that was constructed kind of to accommodate future development. As part of the project, the median opening was closed and the driveway was converted to a right-in only. It was no longer allowed to make an exit at that location. It then meant that all traffic would exit out of this driveway, and any traffic from the north, which wasn't a lot, the interchange itself was right here, but any traffic from the north would have to access it coming in off of the stub road. So when we evaluated this and looked at the site, here's a picture kind of from the existing access spot, pretty close to where the passenger car fueling station would be. The biggest thing that jumped out is, how do you exit? Where is the exit? How do you find it? And we felt that that would be problematic in terms of the space that was provided, either in terms of trying to kind of shimmy by if there was a truck at that fueling station and get around, or to go in that location. As part of our evaluation for this one, looked at an alternative solution to kind of provide additional paving and signage to the north to direct people to that other access. One of the things we'll talk a little bit more about is that the regional access studies are used for isn't necessarily to say, okay, this is what needs to be built, but it's to help the appraisal process and the appraiser who is involved at the time to say, here is a cost that can be associated with improvements that would help restore reasonable access to this site. Again, not that that's the only thing that can be done. There's been many a times where studies have been done, appraisals have been identified, improvements to be conducted or be placed on a site. The owner has gotten the check, said we're willing to live with it as is and go on. Other times improvements are made or they make their own improvements. Third example is on a state highway, northeast part of the state, and looking at a major expansion of this corridor. It goes from a 2-lane rural high-speed facility, 55 miles an hour, to proposed a 4-lane divided roadway. For this particular location, because of the alignment, almost all of the widening was going to occur to the south. The subject property was a farm implement dealer. His primary access off the state highway was here. Secondary access off the side road. When we met with them, they fully acknowledged no one really goes in and out of there. They tell their employees not to. Most of the people that go in and out, they typically go out of the side just because there's a vertical curve to the west. It's a higher speed facility. It's not the most safe. They were actually okay for the most part with the removal of that access, recognized that there were issues. So that driveway goes away. This access was relocated further to the south and to get it away from the state highway. A couple things that we looked at is trying to assess the reasonable access of this site and what the impacts were. The loss of that access itself, in and of itself, wasn't the worst. We still have full access down here, which has full access to the state highway. The challenge with this, here is the front of the building, their showroom, everything else. The front door itself was over here. They had customer parking along kind of the north end and in this area. The back half of their property was service and repairs. So under the kind of proposed new alignment, anyone that's entering the site comes into the repair area, facing a couple large garage doors. There's parking there, so how do you actually physically get around the front of the store to get to the front door. Is that in itself reasonable under that condition? Again, under the similar conditions before, we looked at what else could be done to kind of restore reasonable access, restore internal circulation to this site. Is this the only solution? Absolutely not. A solution that provides that accommodations for circulation and parking? Yes. So with the realigned access location here, bring in, kind of for the primary customer, directing them to the front of the store, eliminate the parking here, that becomes a roadway, create additional parking in this area, and several new paved areas around the site, and landscaped areas to kind of guide people and direct people to different locations. So kind of what are some of the things that go into the reasonable access study and components that we evaluate? I mean, this isn't necessarily an all-encompassing list, but it's kind of the primary things that I've seen that we've done and that others have done as well. It's kind of what is that access before and after the project? How exactly are we impacting it, and what is the result afterwards? Keep hammering home on the circulation. What is the circulation before and after the project? And lots of times you can point to it and say, after is not good, but before is pretty crappy as well. And so how do you weigh this much crappy versus this much crappy? It's kind of a crapshoot. The other thing we dig into is kind of the conformance with local ordinances. And not so much from the true access side of things, but if you're acquiring a right-of-way and impacting the parking or the internal circulation, how are your setbacks different now? If you're losing a row of parking, does that change your parking requirements? The overall design criteria as to what are the specific internal circulation widths that you need for that particular, whether it's a county, city, town, those types of elements. For nearly every project, try to meet with the property owner, business manager on the site to really get an understanding of what their needs are. There's only so much that you can see in terms of one, looking at a plan view, driving out to the site yourself and doing it until you sit down with them and kind of get an understanding as to, okay, here's where my patrons come in and out. Here's when I really have a problem with the project. Most of them are very open, my experience, talking with you and hoping to convey, here's how this project is impacting you. They want to be heard in that regard. There have been a couple that were not as open to having those discussions or had been dealing with people in the past and were kind of done dealing. But for the most part, it's incredibly informative for us to find out that kind of inside information as to what are the real understanding of the site that we need to know that you can't just get from looking at their site plan. And then the final element is improvements to restore the reasonable access. Again, it's not the end-all solution. It really helps feed into the appraisal process as to what it would need to restore that. Whether or not that's from a strict access perspective, an internal circulation perspective, a parking perspective. The overall benefit, guiding the design. Really kind of depends on where it comes into play. When we first started doing these studies, it was usually on the tail end of a design project or as part of litigation. More and more often getting involved earlier on the project, and not even that you're doing a full-blown evaluation of it, but just a 15-minute discussion as to, if we do this, how's it going to impact this property? What else could we do? Is there any way to get around this? Or do we just go forward with it and bite the bullet? Minimize the overall impacts, perhaps to that property and to the project itself. Minimizing the risks, cost, schedule, litigation. All those are major factors when you're dealing with access. And one of the ones that's become more and more apparent and really wasn't aware of when we first started doing is the role within the appraisal process itself. is to be able to provide that value. They're very good at identifying what those costs are in terms of acquiring the building or acquiring certain parts of the land. But when it deals with impacting access and how do you assess that and changing some of the circulation values, that's really outside of their realm. And so to kind of give them options to say, here's what you can use to restore that access, really help in that process. And in summary, reasonable access, not direct access, should be provided at all properties. Construction of the median or the closure median opening is non-compensable, it's done as part of police power. And assessing reasonable access during the scoping and or design process can minimize project risks and really streamline the overall project. But we have time for some questions. Okay.